The Redefine Podcast is part of the Win-Make Give Podcast Network.
I was pretty messed up a few years ago. I'm still pretty messed up. Let's be very honest. But I got nudged by my buddy Than Bartson. He's like, "Hey, I know you need a coach. I know you need somebody who is going to help you navigate through the complete and total hot mess express that you are." And he's like, "You got to talk to my buddy Shane." And I talked to now my buddy Shane, but I used to pay him money and now he's here for free. Isn't that fun? And I was marveled at the brilliance that this man has. Shane Hips is a smart dude. And I know he doesn't think he's very smart, or maybe he does think he's super smart and he's just a jerk for feeling that way. But nonetheless, I've been able to take what was me being the recipient of Shane's great coaching and guidance, and now I get to have a cool friend in the trenches, and I'm excited to have him as our guest on the Redefine Podcast. Gang, my name's Eric Hatch, bringing you success stories to see the tragedy and the mess that it took to actually get here. And our guest today is Shane Hips. Shane from Phoenix, Arizona. My gosh, it's good to see you.
Great to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. We got to spend some time in North Carolina a couple months ago. Was it a couple months ago? Was it a month ago? I don't know. It all blends together for me.
It's a month.
Yeah. How was that for you? Because you and I got to try to pretend to be like super tough.
Yeah.
How'd that work for you?
Didn't work at all. No, I stood around and had no idea what I was doing. I had no business being there, really.
We got to do some cool military simulations, and that started as a part of a group that we're connected with. And I felt so out of my element, Shane. I don't know. Did you feel like you were just like watching a bunch of people play Army and I'm back there to eat snacks?
Man, I was a Mennonite pastor for a number of years. We're pacifists. So like, I didn't even know which end of the gun to hold. I grew up with no guns. I didn't hunt, nothing. So I was hilarious next to those guys. I'm sure they were like, "Get this guy out of here."
Yeah. There was a thing when we were playing paintball and I'm crawling across what felt like 5 football fields. I'm sure it was like 40 feet, but for me, I was crawling across like 5 football fields, and they warned us ahead of time, like, "Hey man, watch out for fire ants." And sure enough, what do I lay down in is a bed of fire ants. So I am both dumb and physically limited when it comes to any sort of toughness. Go figure. Shane, you're a guy that has done some cool stuff, and I want to hear the highlight reel. I know bits and pieces of it, but like I think what you've done, pretty fascinating in life. So educate me, educate our audience on your beautiful, perfect, flawless highlight reel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything for me is always up and to the right. I think we talked about that. So if you're wanting struggles, I don't have any, never have, but I will imagine what they're like and try to talk about them.
Thank you for faking your way through this.
In simple terms, I started my career in advertising, helped launch Porsche's SUV to the North American market, learned a whole lot about how people are influenced by language and words and images, and found myself at odds with it, actually. At a certain point, felt like I had this skill set and this ability that was being used maybe for things that I didn't really resonate with who I was. I was a very committed Christian, and I had this dissonance between kind of trying to tell people that buying a $150,000 car was going to make them feel better, and what I thought was more real, which was what was going on in your inner life, was probably more powerful than anything. And so left that, and I did what all people who are rising in the ranks of the ad world. I went into seminary. I wrote my first book.
When was this, Shane?
This would have been 2001 is when I left advertising, went to seminary. I had about a 5-year career in advertising, went to seminary. And while I was there, I began to see all these really interesting overlaps between what was happening in the history of theology in the church and how theology changed and how people saw God in completely different ways at different eras and times. And it seemed random. Like, how did people go from this to this abstract sudden launch that God was no longer up in the sky, that he was in the community? How did that happen? How did you go from images and sacraments to just a book? And how did you go from all these different things? And I was like, what was going on? And I began to overlay my experience, background, and research and knowledge from a thinker named Marshall McLuhan, who wrote a book called Understanding Media. That's what I used to try to do what I did for a living in advertising. And I overlaid it across the church history and theological history and began to see this overwhelming number of connections. And I wrote my first book, and then another book related to that about how technology shapes people's faith and how they gather together and why they gather together and all that. And so that got some notice. It was a #1 bestseller, and I began to speak all over the place, and eventually became the pastor of a Mennonite church of about 300 people. Then I went to a large mega church of about 6,000 to 8,000 people. And then I left that and became an executive coach, and have been working with clients who come from, all kinds of fun places, small businesses, entrepreneurs, people like yourself, which I really love working in smaller contexts, but I also been invited into larger, more well-known things, CIA, Apple, Amazon, all kinds of stuff. And just, yeah, I've been doing that for the last, since 2013. So about 10 years, a little over 10 years. But I was coaching leaders before that in a church context. Now I'm coaching them in business contexts. And that's kind of the latest. So I've written 5 books. I've spoken to lots of people. I've shared the stage with Simon Sinek, Malcolm Gladwell, John Maxwell, big names. But I'm really at heart, like, I love these one-on-one experiences with people. So we'll tell more of the story later, but those high points of where I got to where I am.
Yeah. Are you where you want to be?
Absolutely. Yeah. Right where I love, right where I want to be.
So obviously you weren't always where you wanted to be. Like, if we rewind the clock back from the Porsche days in advertising, through ministry, through coaching and working with a bunch of entrepreneurs and speaking and writing and all those things, you've been in a lot of different places. Is this your favorite right now?
Yes, this is my favorite.
Where
Absolutely.
where was your least favorite?
Might have been the mega church. Might
Mm.
have been the mega church. Yeah.
How come?
Um, I was feeling the incredible strain on feeling like I was no longer fitting inside the Christian echo chamber. And yet I was being asked to lead a community of faith that needed me squarely inside the echo chamber. And what people may not know about religion is that all religions and every denomination, the way that they bifurcate the differences are through language. And so your language is what tells you whether you're inside or outside a given community. Not your skin color, not the band you like, none of that. It's language patterns. So, for example, in certain religious communities, the word obedience is the word that means you're part of us. You're seeking to be obedient. That means you're one of us. If you use the word tolerant, you are not one of us. In other communities of faith, the word tolerance means you're one of us, and the word obedience means you're not one of us. So they use language patterns to effectively create communities, and some of that's really good and useful. But what I found was I no longer resonated with those restrictions, and as I began to express my experience of God and faith in new and different language patterns, I became seen as quite an unreliable ally. They were like, well, I think you're one of us, but I don't know for sure. And there was a lot of like tension and confusion. And so what was happening for me was this deep sense of people really need me to care about things and carry the flag for things that I don't actually think matter or that I care about.
Mm.
And the biggest reason for that was, at that time, I was having an inner experience that I'd never had before, which was, for years and years and years, I had studied the menu and had never really, truly, regularly, consistently tasted the meal. So religion for me is like the menu, and I think menus are great. I'm not opposed to menus. When I go to a restaurant, I like them. But once I have the meal, the menu is no longer interesting. And so I began to have very deep experiences of being satiated spiritually. And therefore, once you have that, and people are like, we need to fight over this menu, I'm like, I'd rather just eat my burger. It's really delicious. I don't really need to fight about the menu. Like, you can keep it, you can throw it out, you can burn. I don't care. I'm good. I'm not opposed to it, but like, I really love what it's pointing to rather than the thing itself. And I just found that a tremendous amount of people had been indoctrinated into the menu is all there is. And you need to defend, fight for, refine, and be afraid of others who like different menus. And it was just bizarre to me. And I just didn't fit. So that's why
have you always been someone that doesn't fit?
probably on some level. I'm not a, it's interesting because I don't know if you people maybe know the Enneagram. The Enneagram is a personality typology system that is quite powerful. I use it a lot in my coaching work. And there's a
You
particular
introduced it to me years ago. Yeah, it was 2017, 2018. You introduced it to me.
Yeah. So I'm a 3 on the Enneagram for those who know what that means. But those who don't know what that means, it's a particular type that's desperate for approval. The 3 comes into the world with a deep sense of I'm not worth very much. And they spend their life effectively conforming to the subgroups that they respect the most. And they try to become the idealized version of that subgroup. And what happens is they're like a chameleon. Now, that chameleon can feel a little bit deceptive, but the fundamental deception is first to yourself. So I was busy deceiving myself, not paying attention to what I wanted. It was sort of like, well, what do you want me to want? I'll want that because I respect you and like you, and I want you to like me. So the best way to get liked and approved of is to turn into the shape or color of the thing you think is awesome. And so I found people in the world that I thought were awesome and cool, and I wanted them to like me. And so I became the shape of that. So what was interesting is, for whatever reason, I think I respected and loved contrarians. So I would get very, very liked and well regarded by the people that I liked and wanted to like me. And it just so happened that they liked people who were contrarians. So I didn't fit in a lot of ways, but that not fitting in was part of my being liked by other people. So that's a level of complexity that may have lost everybody, but that's what was going on in me. I can go deeper, or we can stop talking about this.
No, it's so interesting and layered because I worked for the church for nearly a decade, and so I come from a same and similar vein of having gone through that, and the desire to be liked and the desire to follow where your faith is can sometimes be at conflict, because you were talking about the desire of being liked being there, and that was almost like adhering to the menu. Is that an accurate parallel?
So when I went to college, I went to TCU, and there was a little stream of fundamentalist Christianity there. I had grown up in kind of a centrist Christianity, and when I went to college, there wasn't centrism. There was, like, in the South, it was either right-wing fundamentalism or left-wing liberalism, and I was like, I don't know which one I should do. I think I kind of like this one better. So I went to that one. So I was like an ideal, amazing fundamentalist. I was fantastic at it. And people liked me, and I knew how to get liked. Now, people who could see through the BS, they were like, I think he's kind of, I don't know that I don't really trust this guy. Because that's what 3s can sometimes generate, is a little bit of like, you feel like you're saying in all the right things, but I don't know if who you really are is that. And so a few people could see through me, and I was always like, what are you talking about? I'm totally this. Then I left, went into advertising, and in advertising, I encountered like a whole lot of postmodern people who didn't care about religion, didn't really care about what happened after you died, didn't care about how much I knew the Bible and all the Bible's verses I'd memorized. And suddenly I began to morph into like, how can I be like the cool kind of postmodern guy who gets along with that crew? And then I was still very devoted to my faith. And so there was this community of people that thought, you should never give your life up for work. You should be devoted to God first and work second. And so I took this weird pride in like not staying till 8 at night, even though all my peers were staying till 8 at night. And, my boss at one point confronted me as like, you need to stay later. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I just can't do that. I've got other things in life. And I was very like committed to this. I'm different. And the reason is because I didn't respect the people in advertising. I didn't care if they liked me. I wanted these other people to like me. And so at each step, I would kind of like morph and change and grow. And that got me into real trouble when I became a pastor. So when I was a pastor, my experience fundamentally of leadership was I had 300 people in the congregation. That meant I had 600 opinions. And all of those opinions were my boss. And so I wanted to bend into the shape of all of them liking me, and it was impossible. And that's when I started burning out, because I was like trying to look like the thing they wanted me to look like. And it was impossible, because if I looked right to this group, I couldn't look like to that. So I learned a very important leadership lesson then, which is get good at disappointing people. And that was a powerful kind of evolution for me. It was like, I'm going to let a lot of people down because of who I am. And that was the first wave of kind of inner healing, was it's okay for me to let some people down.
I think the title of this is going to be Shane Hips letting people down for his whole life.
Yes, exactly. 48 years letting people down. 49 now.
I'm curious, as someone who worked at the church and dealt with a lot of the interesting layers and ins and outs of church life. Was it good for your faith or bad for your faith?
In a weird way, it was amazing for my faith.
Yeah.
And the reason it was amazing for my faith was when I left seminary, which I loved seminary. I was so enjoyable. I loved all the theology and the machination of everything. And I'm a cerebral in some ways. And so when I went to church land, I realized that I had not been given, I was 30 when I took my first pastorate, and I had not been given any of the inner resources needed to hold space for the kind of immense suffering and demands of a community of faith. And so when I got there, I hit wall after wall after wall of just being like, oh my gosh. And of course, I had young kids at that time, I had a difficult marriage at that time. So I was, from all angles, I was just completely under-resourced emotionally and spiritually. I did not have a spiritual muscle. And what I realized was, I remembered when I was interning as a hospital chaplain at UCLA Medical Center, which is where I learned about the Enneagram while I was in seminary, about 2003. There was this one guy who was my supervisor, and he was what they call a little person. So he was maybe 4 feet tall, and he had braces on his legs, and he looked odd, and he had like canes, 2 canes that he would walk with. And he was a strikingly, unusual looking person. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, cool. And I walked with him one day into a room, a cancer ward. People were dying there. And the woman said to him, how did you just do that? And he said, do what? And she said, when you walked in, the whole room lit up. And I realized that he had a muscle. He'd been doing this for 20 years. He had developed an inner muscle that I didn't have. I had all the kind of knowledge, but I didn't have that muscle. And it kind of stayed with me, and I didn't really know how to develop that muscle. And so when I became a pastor and I hit the wall, I was like, oh, that guy has something I don't have. So I went about searching for resources, technology to develop your inner being, to expand what's inside of you, not what my head was. And I looked in all kinds of strange places: Vedanta Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and all Christian mysticism. And I found all these different techniques that would effectively take me inside to try to expand that part of me, so that I could be a big enough presence to hold space for all the suffering without me, myself, falling apart with everybody. And the most powerful awareness came from a very, very wise teacher who introduced me to the techniques that I use even to this day. He said to me, I was sitting with him and I was just at my wit's end. I literally had met with a neighbor woman who didn't even go to our church, but her and her husbands were friends with us, and they had kids our kids' age, and we were going to a birthday party that afternoon. And she wanted to meet with me to tell me that she had been cheating on her husband for a long time with one of the guys we were going to go to this party for. And she just didn't want me to tell anybody. And as a pastor, I just want this to be confidential, but I just wanted to get it off my chest. So I feel much better. Thank you. And I'm like, oh my God. And I showed up at this party, and here's the guy she's cheating on with. And my wife doesn't even know this woman's cheating. And her husband's there, and he's a sweetheart of a guy, and he has no idea that she is going to blow up their family. And I'm holding all this and I'm just resentful and angry and overwhelmed and sick of it. I'm just like, I'm sick of this. And then I meet this guy there. It's at a kid's birthday party. He's just the neighbor and he's in his 60s. I don't know why he's at a kid's birthday, but he's a very interesting guy. And I sit down with him and he says, I kind of was revealing. I sensed I could trust him. So I started revealing this experience. I didn't tell him the details, but I was like, I'm just tired of it. And he goes, I said, I just have too much empathy. I feel everything from everybody and it's just overwhelming. And he said, you have no idea what your gift is, do you? I was like, no, I think I just said my gift.
This random stranger at a kid's birthday party, as you're in the midst of this marital affair, and this old guy calls you out to say you have no idea what your gift is.
And I'm like, no, I think I just said what my gift was. And by the way, when I first met him, he had just told me his wife had died 3 years before. So I went immediately into pastor mode, like, oh, I'll just pastor him. And I could tell he needed nothing from me. He was beaming with joy. He was fine. He did not require anything. And he told me he like sold books for a living or something. It was really weird. I'm like, this is bizarre. But you seem to have like a really profound something going on. So anyway, you can cut this whole story. This is a longer story than you
This
need.
is fantastic. Are you kidding me?
But he sits down and he says, we kind of go off to the side, just the two of us. And he says, you have no idea what your gift is. And I'm like, of course I do. It's empathy. I just said that. He said, no. And I was like, how do I deal with this? What do I? And he's like, let me ask you a question. Did you look in the mirror this morning? And I go, yeah. And he goes, and did it do its job? Yeah. And he goes, is your reflection still in the mirror? And I go, no. And he looks at me silently. And I'm sitting there looking back at him with a blank stare. And he's like, do I need to say that again? And I'm like, I think you do. Like, I have no idea what you're saying. And he goes, slows it way down. And I'm like, I'm still not going to get it when you go slow, but like, go ahead. Did you look in the mirror? Yes. Did it do its job? Yes. Is your reflection still in the mirror? And for whatever reason, in that moment, the penny dropped. And I suddenly realized I have the invitation to be a mirror, not a sponge. The mirror is simply present, available, does its job without ever being touched. And as soon as the reflection leaves, the mirror is just the mirror again. It retains none of what was shown to it. And that was like earth moving for me. And that began a journey of going within through partly his help. And he introduced me to some others that he had gotten a lot of his wisdom from. And then from then on, I had this unbelievably profound experience of what Jesus taught about rather than knowledge about what Jesus taught about. And once you have the experience, that's the meal. And so I had a greater love and appreciation for who Jesus was, even though in many ways, I think he was profoundly misunderstood. And I think most menus constrain him and distort him in ways that he doesn't intend to be constrained or distorted. And so I just became enamored with the experience that doesn't have a name, it doesn't have words. It's just literally like drinking water, quenching your thirst. Once your thirst is quenched, you don't really care what the container is. I don't, just give me the water. I don't really care what the container is.
Yeah. That's pretty solid, Shane. What's interesting is the language pattern of be a mirror, don't be a sponge. I have stolen that from you 6+ years ago and have regurgitated that in so many ways, so many times so that I forgot the source of where it came from.
That's the best kind.
but I actually think that is such an interesting parallel, right? Is we oftentimes are living with something that is now a lesson that we have forgotten the source.
That's the best kind. You don't need to know the source. It's yours now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now I'm reminded where the source came from, so I'll keep throwing credit your way.
It's not mine. It's somebody else's.
Shane, how's your faith today?
Oh, just deepening. Just always it's more enjoyable every day.
Hmm.
It's not even faith, actually. It's experience. Faith is, well, I'll say it two different ways. There's still faith, of course, meaning in the unknown, when things aren't going your way or what, there isn't for sure a level of trust that we have to muster that something benevolent and bigger than us is here helping. So that has grown exponentially, profoundly, entirely because of my wife, who I married 2 years ago. She's from Mexico. She has a totally different experience of God and faith than I had. And she has modeled a deep, deep faith that I had I don't know that I had sidelined. I just wasn't thinking about it as much anymore because I was enjoying the water so much. I was just like, when you have the water, you're not really thinking about faith. You're just like, there's this ever-present stream of living water from within us that you can drink from no matter what's happening on the outside. But she really helped me begin to return to the possibility that you can actually enjoy what's on the outside too at a whole new level when you actually reactivate faith. So kind of these two things together, which are the experience of that living water, no matter what's happening in my life, is something I have to go to every single day. I have to have every day. I am thirsty. I love my thirst. It draws me in to the water. But then I also have her, she's been modeling for me, and I've been learning from her about what it means to truly trust that the future is good too.
Shane, you have been in leadership positions and you are a leader of leaders. How did you bring yourself to a point to allow your wife to lead you? Because it seems fascinating to me that you are this executive coach and you're sharing stages with the Simon Sinek's and Gladwell's of the world and writing these books. And like, I consider myself a leader, and you're the leader that I go to. You're a leader of leaders, which is such an interesting pressure-filled position. And yet this beautiful, fiery Mexican lady comes into your life and she becomes a leader for you. Like, how does someone become a leader for somebody like you?
What's funny, I don't really think I don't feel, I used to. Honestly, a weird thing happens when you start drinking this water. The hierarchy vanishes. You no longer feel the hierarchy. I did at one time. There was a time where thought I was pretty impressed with myself, and it took years of drinking this water to kind of realize, no, you're just a human and you're going back to the dirt like everybody else. And you're super, super lucky to have this experience of existence. And weirdly, that experience of existence, meaning the breath that enters you and exits and enters and exits, it doesn't seem to have much of an opinion about what you've achieved or haven't achieved or failed or succeeded or any of it. It just has no relationship to any of it. And so the more you focus on and be a student of that breath, the easier it is to know that you can learn from a barking dog. There's no limit to the things that can teach me. So, yeah, it's an interesting question because I hadn't even years ago I would have thought of it in those terms. I think it's understandable. I just, as you asked it, when I'm answering it in this moment, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It never even occurred to me that would be a way to structure.
But what wasn't that such an important part of, because if I'm 5 steps behind you, right? I'm trying to do big things for the world. I'm trying to experience God through all the things that I do. It's one of the things that binds us together is our passion to do good and to be hands and feet, literally. Position and title and accolades and those sorts of things, I'd love for them not to matter, but I care so deeply about the opinions of others, as my Enneagram will tell me as well, as I care deeply about those things. And so you've now matured in such a way where you say that the hierarchy vanishes. But for so many people that are in spots like I am or you were and that sort, all those things matter a ton. How'd you get through that?
Oh yeah, I don't know how, other than the practice, the habit of what I practice every day, which is going within and drinking the water. Each day, each time I do that, and I don't I don't know how it happens. I just know that it happens, which is I get simpler. I don't know that I get more mature, and I think maybe less mature in some ways, like simpler, like the way a kid is simple. I love that. I want that easy simplicity. You know how kids are wide open and heartful and just they just don't care about that shit either, you know? And so something about
I'm
going,
so glad that you swear, because like I love Jesus, but I cuss a little, right? That for me is so
I hope
relatable.
that's okay. You might need to cut it out, but
No,
um,
keep it coming.
so when you think about it in this way, the heart, the human heart, has no age. It's the mind that has an age. And the reason we know that is because when a 3-year-old says, I love you, Grandma, and Grandma says, I love you to the 3-year-old, none of us sit there and go, well, I don't think that 3-year-old really loves Grandma because she hasn't developed very much. Like maybe when she's 18 or 20, she'll be able to say she loves someone, but she's got to develop that skill. Nobody does that. The mind is the one that's always looking at and assessing and judging. And I do it too. Don't get me wrong. I don't sit here and I'm literally not saying I've like achieved an enlightenment at all. I'm saying the more you go into the heart, you just like the simplicity and you just like that more and more. And because I love the simplicity so much, and that's what feeds me so much, all of the things that the mind caused so much stress for me in, which it still likes to try to do, and always will, and never be free of it until I'm gone. But um, it really just becomes about like, I just like this more than that. I just like this more than that. And it's still here and it's still calling me. And there are times I'm sure I get caught up in it. I do, for sure. I can see my shadow clearly. My shadow still loves to be liked by people. So that part of me is still very present and real and active and going on. But from the vantage point of the heart, it's sort of like an amusing play rather than the thing that is crippling, which is what it is. Like when you decide to put your center of gravity there, it's crippling and it is relentless and it's never ending. And so I make it a habit of every single day, I try to put my center of gravity here. And then when I forget, I try to remember. And like anything, over enough time, habits form and I try to stay simple. And so, yeah, I do not want to give the impression at all that I am, uh, it's just grace. It's just pure grace. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I have a breath, you have a breath. Beyond that, I don't know really the difference between us other than we're both super lucky
Yeah.
because the dirt outside that's made of the exact same chemical composition as this body doesn't have that breath, doesn't dance, sing, cry, laugh, screw, whatever. This one gets to for 25,550 days and then it doesn't anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm leasing this form. I don't own it. I'm so grateful for it because it gives me this experience. And then one day it goes back and hopefully I join the breath, the infinite.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the finite and the infinite dancing
Yeah.
together impossibly.
Yeah. I love that. Shane, changing energies for just a moment. You had talked about how as you were in seminary and as you were at the Mennonite church and the mega church, you were also battling and dealing with a marriage that was unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which is such an interesting conflict, that you're taking care of others and you can't take care of your own at home.
Yep.
And there's so many narratives and things that that happen through that. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to pull the curtain back a little bit and help me
Sure.
understand what was going on in your mind at that time, what was going on in your life at that time, because my guess is most people are trying to figure out how do we take our brokenness and still be great through it.
Mm. Yeah. I think yeah, I mean I'm happy to talk about any of it. So at the heart of my marriage falling apart was really just the 3 in me, which was out of touch with my heart. I was living up in my head And the way that a 3 can manifest this is maximum flexibility, highly adaptable. Plus you layer on that natural tendency. I also have a 2 wing. The 2 wing in the Enneagram is the helper. They're also not in touch with their own heart. They're in touch with everybody else's heart. So I was busy feeling and sensing everybody else's heart. And layer on top of that some theology that said Jesus sacrificed his life for everyone and everything. So if I want to be like Jesus, I need to be willing to sacrifice and suffer and do all these things. So I was in a marriage that I was genuinely unhappy in. And my wife, by the way,
How old were you when you got married?
I was 23.
Okay.
I was young.
Fairly young.
I had dated like one other person for 2 months in my life, and I got married out of college. Partly conservative Christian kind of values. Lots of people do it and they're wildly successful. I just wasn't. And my wife, ex-wife, wrote a whole book about our divorce. And those that want to read it, her name is Andrea Hips, and it's a book where she tells the whole thing that happened. And so anything I say,
do you agree with her perspective?
Completely. In fact, I contributed a section to the book to just support, because she really wrote about her own experience. She didn't really badmouth me at all. And I was like, hey, look, you've kind of done a one-sided job here. I think I should at least, she gave me the manuscript to read before she published it kindly.
Wow.
And I read it and I said, I think you're missing a piece about my half of the contribution to this equation. And I said, do you want me to tell you what to write? And she's like, why don't you just write it and I'll put it in. And I'm like, okay. So I wrote a section and it's in there.
You realize how weird that is, right?
Some people say that. Yeah. Some people say it's weird.
It's awesome. It's weird. It's awesome.
Yeah. Andrea had she admits all of this in her book. She was an only child. She was very focused on herself. She was fairly controlling, had a hard time controlling her emotions. And so she kind of looked through the lens of the world of, as long as I'm happy, he's happy. And I don't really need to worry about him or his happiness or what he needs. And because I was such a savior mentality helper type, I had completely forgotten myself and was just busy trying to make her happy and pretending that I didn't have any needs, because I'm a lot like Jesus and I'm better than her and much higher and wider and more wise and enlightened than all these other people out there who don't have my enlightened understanding. And it was just complete bullshit. And I was lying to myself, and I didn't have the courage to confront somebody who I was scared of. I was very frightened of her, I was terrified of her emotions. So that's the coward. I asked the therapist, I'm like, what do you mean I was a coward? Like the liar I get. I wasn't totally honest about how I wasn't happy for years. I was busy letting her on that it was fine, that it was fine, that it was fine. And it wasn't fine. I was not happy at all. And so I let it go way too long, and the nerve endings died, and the nerve endings never came back, and I was done. And that's not her fault. That's my responsibility. And so I said to the therapist, like, what would you have done? What would I have done different? And she said, oh, a courageous person would have just said, hey, if you keep doing this, we're going to be done. And so you better stop it. And then you would let her tear the house down around you and threaten to burn you alive. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, that's much better.
Yeah, I was like, no, you're right. I don't have the courage to do that. And so anyway, so that's how I was able to do what I did there. And all of those things are, invaluable lessons that I cherish. Painful, awful.
Well, looking back, you cherish, but in the midst of it, I mean, you're
terrible,
in a dark
awful,
place, aren't you?
No good, very bad day. Yeah.
You had just left a very public, a very well-known mega church, and it wasn't a clean divorce, right?
It actually wasn't too bad. That was not a terrible divorce. Effectively what happened was Rob, the co-pastor, was leaving the church because he was too kind of like didn't fit. And when I saw that, I realized, oh my gosh, if he doesn't fit, I really don't fit, because I'm like even more wild than he is. So I was told the elders when he left, I was like, they wanted me to take over full time and do it. I was like, I can be your interim pastor.
Yeah.
And they said, okay. So I just said, let me just pastor until you get somebody new. And I did that also because I knew my marriage was falling apart. And I'm like, this is not going to go well. Like this is going to go bad. So the crazy thing was, I lost my career. I lost my job. I lost more than half my net worth. I lost most of my friends. I lost my marriage, and I lost access to my kids at least half the time, all in the same window of like a couple of months. And the most of that, like the reason I lost most of my friends is because they felt kind of betrayed. They were like, you presented yourself as one thing, but you were kind of another. And I was like, you're right. I was walking around pretending I was 6'4" and I'm only 6 feet. And I probably should have told you that. And they're like, but I like you better when you're 6'4". And I'm like, I kind of do too. But I'm
Hmm.
unfortunately not 6'4". I'm 6 feet. And so some people couldn't tolerate that. And I respect them for it. I'm like, I get it because I presented something that I wasn't. And other people came back and they were like, you know what? You're not so bad at 6 feet. I can handle that. I'm like, cool. That's what I am. So it ain't going to change. So what was weird though, is as I lost everything I just described, it was like burning everything to the ground, with the exception of the heartbreak that I felt with the kids, which I don't know that anybody ever gets over.
Mm.
It's always a heartbreak. What I did feel, everybody looked at me and said, my God, your life is falling apart. And the weirdest thing that was going on in me was every time somebody said that, and maybe because I was spending a lot more time in my heart and getting a lot more honest with myself, the words that came back to me were a little whisper that said, no, actually, everything's falling together. And that's what it felt like. Heartbreak for sure, loss, grief, trauma. But I never ever felt like my life was falling apart. I felt like it was falling together. I felt like I was coming home to more of who I really was. And all the things that I had constructed around me were just reflections of a false self anyway.
Mm.
So what was happening was the false self was being removed, because the more you go into your heart, the more you get your true self. And as the false self gets removed, all of the things that it built and all of its attachments go with it. And so I was very fortunate that I had started to taste the water and I had started to make that journey home, because I only saw all that other stuff as the false self going away, rather than like
Did you
my life
know it
is
was false when you built it up around you?
no, no, I was a slow journey. It was a slow awakening and awareness. Now, I don't mean that everything's false. I just mean that like um I'm still a pastor at heart, even in what I do. I've always been, but like I don't need a job for me to be that. So it's not like it was all some scam and lie. And I did appreciate my wife and I did love her, and we just beat each other up in the wrong ways. And guess what? Love is fragile and it can break. So take really good care of it if you've got it. Don't take it for granted. I took it for granted. She took it for granted. We broke it. That's what happens sometimes. So, I don't mean to say like I was some terrible fraud all the time, but I definitely had like a false self-image that I was projecting out, and still do it. We all do to some degree, right? But I have it still. It was just really big. And so when it fell together, it it was a ultimately actually very good thing. Like it didn't feel terrible. But again, I think it would have been like a deep, painful, horrendous death if I hadn't been in my heart.
Mm.
It was a death, but it was more like a caterpillar going into a chrysalis. That's what it felt like. I had that
Shane,
image.
Shane, how do you know the difference between heart and head?
So this is interesting because all of that hard, difficult pain and challenge, a book came out of that. One of my books is called Cats Don't Bark: How to Accept Who You Are. What is it? How to Accept Who You're Not, Trust Who You Are, and Live Your Unique Purpose. I can't remember the subtitle, but the point is, Cats Don't Bark. It's
I've just written
basically
so many books, I don't remember the titles of all of them.
yeah. um, yeah. So anyway, it's kind of a wayfinding book. And at the heart of that wayfinding is going into your heart. So I spent a lot of time learning it because I was really, really bad at it. Like a lot of people, right? We end up learning the thing that we're most awful at. So when I work with myself, when I work with others, the thing that I know over and over again that I'm listening to the heart is simple. It really doesn't have many judgments. And and it's really, really connected to images and feelings. It's a felt wisdom. The mind is highly elaborative, generally confusing, full of judgments, and full of desperation, and full of deception. And I make a distinction between the heart and the mind. I'm not talking about reason and emotion, right? Because emotions are also can be really crazy and wild and deceptive and all that stuff. And the mind does both. It plays with emotion. The heart, as a center of wisdom, as an intelligence center, its own, uses feelings, but it's far more subtle. It's like a whisper amidst white noise. And so the heart is also very, very gentle in how it speaks. So whenever it speaks, it's usually a gentle nudge, and you're welcome to ignore it, and it'll just recede a little bit. So that's why people have to learn how to quiet the mind, calm the emotions, and create spaces so that you can actually descend enough into that inner wisdom that all of us have.
That is cause for pause for me. Yeah, I think it was you that said this to me, and I need you to correct me if I'm wrong, but I go back to our coaching together, and you had said to me, Eric, your whisper is a shout. Is that something you say, Shane?
That is something I say a lot. Yeah.
Okay. And is there a parallel between telling somebody like me, who is somebody who has maybe voice and influence in my weird little world here in Fargo? Is there a parallel in saying that my whisper is a shout, and then you also saying that the heart whispers?
Oh, it's interesting. I've never linked those two. Let me think about it for a minute. When I talk about your whisper as a shout, I love that you just linked to the heart. I've never made that connection. Thank you for that.
I hadn't either.
You know, the context in which I talk about your whisper as a shout is when I talk to leaders. I want them to understand that they need to walk around with an awareness that they have a megaphone strapped to their mouth at all times, by virtue of the fact that you have power over people's lives in some form or fashion. And the bigger the thing you lead, the bigger your megaphone is, the more your whisper gets amplified and therefore distorted and misunderstood. So I mean it quite differently when I'm talking about it. But what you're referring to, if you wanted to apply it to the heart, I could certainly feel it as when you finally hear that whisper and trust that whisper, it is indisputable guidance that will never lead you astray. And in that regard, the more you attune your ear to the heart, the more I guess it kind of functions like a shout. Like, now that I can hear my heart a lot more than I used to be able to, when it speaks, it's like indisputable. I don't let anybody else interfere with it. I don't care what anybody else thinks, feels, wants, needs. I don't have any idea whether I don't even think in categories of right and wrong when the heart speaks. It doesn't think in those categories. I don't really care. And I remember I was working with an executive recently who said to me, I want to learn how to get into the heart. And we're doing some exercises to get in there. And he said, my biggest concern is, like, what if I get it wrong? And I said, according to whom? Like, how do you know what's right or wrong in terms of the decisions you make? There'll be lots of people that have lots of opinions about what you did as good, bad, right, wrong, or whatever. It is not the domain of the heart to make that assessment. And so when you follow the heart, the only way you can meaningfully do it is to divest yourself of all outcomes. So by all accounts, externally, everybody could tell me, and all of you would agree, that the choices I was making and the things that were happening to me in 2013 when I lost everything were categorically bad. That's bad. And if I said, no, I'm just following my heart, they'd be like, you're full of shit. What you're doing is bad and wrong and not good. But in my heart, I had no debate. I knew this is exactly what was supposed to be happening for me. I have far less influence than I used to have. I am way less important and interesting to people than I used to be. I was a minor celebrity. Now nobody has any idea who I am. I don't look nearly as cool. None of it is good as is good looking. And I love where I am. I love it. So that's what my heart needed. Other people's heart will guide them into big, huge things, and it's fine. Like, I'm not even saying looking for big, huge things is a distraction. No, it was just, for me, it was.
Yeah.
It just wasn't authentic for me. For other people, it's absolutely authentic.
Mhm. I want to end with a Shane-ism, and then I want to give you the title of your next book. Okay. One of my favorite Shane-isms is there's not right or wrong. There's just choices and consequences. Something I learned from you years ago that I still reiterate all the time, but I remember where that one came from. The other one that I want to give you as your next book title is I think you need to talk about being a heart leader,
Oh, interesting.
because when we combined the whisper of the heart and the whisper of a leader, how those two things, if you take the whisper of your heart and use that as a leader, is the kind of person I want to follow. And you're the kind of person I want to follow, Shane. So thank
Mm.
you for drinking the water and not serving the menu.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for that book title. Maybe you should write that book. Sounds like you're the one who made the connection.
Uh, I am flirting with my next book title, and somebody's going to go buy the domain if I say it out loud. So I'm not going to.
Okay.
And instead, I'm excited to write another one as well. But gang, I got to say, Shane, you are such a gift to me and to this world. And I think it's okay if more people know you, even if you're not wearing cool hipster jeans. You're still a cool hipster to me. Folks, check out Shane Hips. Just Google him. You'll find all his stuff out there. And if you like the Redefine podcast, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button so you can get all of our stuff coming at you. Hey, we have more awesome episodes coming up, so don't sleep on it, gang. We will catch you on the flippity flip. God bless you. Until next time.